Rarely do you see a group of grown women playing with Legos. But in the basement of the Thornhill Baptist Church, there's always play and laughter when these women get together. That's because they share a common bond. They're all caregivers.
Both of them have come into memory.
Gloria Stafford is marriage and family therapist at the church.
Well, we have quite a few caregivers, living caregivers and nannies who work in our area, and we have quite a number coming to our church. One by one, they started inviting friends, and as a congregation, we identified a need to start something for them.
So Stafford created a Caregivers Ministry. From counseling to job searches to dealing with government papers, she does a bit of everything. Once a month, the group gets together to break bread and unwind.
Well, we offer them a sense of connection, a sense of family, far from home. Many of the caregivers who come are not part of our faith community, but they just come to our caregiver support group. So we try to share with them the love of God and just to be a witness in our community.
So we're just going to read a little portion from 1 John 1.
Education, skill building, and social events are also key components to the ministry, she says.
We also do a lot of different topics that relate to where they're at. So resume building. Yesterday we had a CPR first aid course. We offer courses on stress management, caregiver burnout, and then we have barbecues, social events, trips to different places. So just anything that encourages them and gives them a place to come that they can belong.
Located just north of Toronto, the community of Thornhill is an affluent one. But inside many beautiful homes lives an invisible society, she says.
So they work in Canada for 2 to 3 years and then hope eventually to get their Canadian citizenship. They're working with families. Some are looking after young children, infants, and then some are looking after elderly people as well.
Often, she says, they have specialized needs because of the nature of their work.
So they're far away from their husbands, parents, children. They work very hard, long hours. Many are underappreciated, undervalued. Many are feeling very lonely and isolated.
Claire Ramirez and Jezebel Vicente know just how difficult it is to be far away from loved ones. Both are caregivers to young children and left families in the Philippines.
It's hard for me to, far from our family, back home especially. We miss our, special occasions like birthdays and, reunions.
For Canadians who have a caregiver or nanny, Ramirez and Vicente say it's important to keep the lines of communication open and to see your nanny as a person and not just the help.
Maybe they should figure out the interest of their nanny. For example, if a nanny is good in singing or in playing guitar or something, like encourage them to expose their talents in a way that it's another way of expressing themselves here in Canada.
Both women say they are grateful the church not only recognized them and their talents, but also stepped in to fill a void.
For me, I felt really overwhelmed with joy and gladness that somehow they gave us attention. They gave a special a ministry for caregivers, which we really need.
And while they're far away from their loved ones, they say the caregivers have become a second family.
They're sharing their problems and we're sharing our problems to them. And, it's like we're the same, encouraging each other.
We laugh at each other's, experiences, like just bringing out things which has been piled for the week.
We could be very scared.
Both Ramirez and Vicente are waiting for their papers to be processed. They hope to have their husbands join them soon and have big plans for the future.
I'll be a teacher by then.
A mother and a
mom
teacher.
and a teacher. Yeah, we seem to have the same, visions in life. Yeah, we are both teachers in the Philippines. So.
Not all of the men and women who come through the Living Caregivers program are as fortunate as the women of the Thornhill Caregivers group. Abuse does occur, often because of isolation, lack of resources, and a general lack of knowledge when it comes to Canadian labor laws. But through education, groups like the Canadian Coalition for In-Home Care are trying to change that.
Especially at this time of year.
Marna Martin is chair of the Immigration and Labor Issues Committee. While employers typically call for information, caregivers commonly complain about unpaid overtime hours and wages, which should be paid hourly and at minimum wage, she says.
This is not a cheap labor program. It's a labor market policy. And it is a program that the government developed to provide help to legitimate families needing in-home care for children, elderly, and special needs. It's not for people to have a cheap housekeeper or a maid around.
Before hiring a live-in caregiver or nanny, Stafford says there are a few things employers need to consider.
They have to provide room and food for the caregiver. It's not just what you're paying your nanny. You have to make deductions from the gross wages. And those deductions have to go to Revenue Canada, plus the employer's share. They pay an equal amount of CPP and 1.4 times the EI.
In April of 2010, Citizenship and Immigration Canada made several changes to the Live-In Caregivers program to remedy some of the abuses that were occurring. In Ontario, Bill 210 came into effect in March, with several changes to protect live-in caregivers, such as a ban on recruitment fees that often saw workers from third world countries dishing out up to $10,000 to work in Canada. Despite these changes, Martin says threats and abuses do occur because often employers and employees aren't aware of the laws. For example, some caregivers still face threats of deportation and may have their passport and documentation seized by their employer.
First of all, nannies need to know that an employer can't deport them, which is a threat that's often used, but it's not a possibility for an employer to do that. If any employer or agency or anyone else does take a caregiver's passport or any of their documentation, they will look into it and get the documentation back, and the person will be charged.
She's quick to say, however, that not all caregiver-employer relationships are abusive. Ultimately, she says as long as there's mutual respect, it can be a positive experience for everyone.
There are many phenomenal families and great situations, but you never hear about them in the news. You only hear about the horror stories. I think it's great for the caregivers. Canada's the only country in the world that allows them landed immigrant status at the end. And if people treat it well and follow the guidelines, then there's tremendous appreciation for the people who do the job. The children and elders are well looked after, and it's a happy situation and win-win for everybody.
At Thornhill Baptist, Gloria Stafford says the arrival of the caregivers has been a bonus for the church. She says they've brought a joy into the congregation no one expected.
Our meetings are filled with sometimes tears, but a lot of laughter, a lot of joy, and they just encapsulate the verse that they go singing with joy everywhere they go. That even though some of them are working in very difficult situations, they're just filled with the joy of the Lord.
As more caregivers lay down roots in Canada and reunite with their families, Stafford says the church is gearing up to meet the changing needs and address potential issues that may come up within the next few years.
So we're not sure what that looks like, how the kids will be able to be part of our Sunday school or youth ministry. So I'm excited about what God has in store for us as we proceed down the road. How we're going to integrate families, help them reunite, and then all the challenges they'll face with that.
Share our hope in Christ as we pass the candle.
Whatever happens, ultimately, Stafford says she wants the caregivers to know just how much they're appreciated in the church.
I want them to walk away feeling that they are loved and cared for and that they're a valuable part of our congregation.
To find out more about the Thornhill Caregivers Ministry or the Canadian Coalition for In-Home Care, visit 100huntley.com. In Thornhill, Ontario, Bridget Entry, 100 Huntley Street.